What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Of course, this is Ryan Thomas coming to you live from Buffalo, New York. A fun-filled weekend I shared with a good friend of mine, Eric Ellis. He's joined me on the show a couple times. We went down to Philadelphia, catch the Phillies game, had some cheesesteaks, ran up the Rocky Steps. It was an awesome time. But now I'm back where I belong in Buffalo, New York to continue the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, and I'll be talking about the Philadelphia trip, in the next, couple editions of the Thomas Take to give you guys some feedback that I got from Philadelphia fans in regards to the Buffalo Bills and the Buffalo Sabres. But I wanted to start off today's show by talking about the action that took place Saturday night, June 3rd, UFC 212 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Jose Aldo put his UFC featherweight title on the line versus Max Halloway, at the time the interim featherweight champion, but now he can remove that interim off of his name. He is now the UFC featherweight champion of the world. Max Halloway crushing Jose Aldo in a third-round technical knockout in a fight in which, to start the fight, I thought Halloway was losing. He did not appear to be comfortable, but something happened. As the second round came to a close, Max Halloway knew what he needed to do, knew that he was down on the scorecards, knew that he had to rise above the pressure that he was facing in this fight and the first round in which he lost. He started to taunt Jose Aldo, and at the closing of the round, Aldo turned his back, and Max Halloway gave him a thumbs up. So there was no response from Aldo in terms of the taunting. And after the fight, Halloway said that he had known right then and there that he had Jose Aldo. He knew that was it for Jose Aldo, and that at the third round he would have him. Aldo appeared to be really confident as the fight went on, but as that round went on, he started to get exposed. Halloway started to clip him. Halloway started to get inside and use his length. The height difference in this fight was something that I talked about quite often, and it was a reason why I predicted that Halloway would win the fight, with Max Halloway standing at 5'11", Jose Aldo standing at 5'7". So definitely the dawn of a new era at the UFC featherweight division. A guy that is very big, strong for a featherweight, and someone that I don't anticipate at 25 years old continuing his reign at featherweight. I think he'll have a long career in the UFC, but not one that will feature him as a featherweight for much longer. Crazy to say that this man is 25 years old, and he is now the UFC featherweight champion, a young champion indeed, and his 11th straight victory inside the UFC. He has the most fights as a UFC featherweight, the most victories as a UFC featherweight, the most significant strikes landed as a UFC featherweight. So Max Halloway is already cinching himself in the among one of the all-time greats. Now he's adding that championship belt to that legacy. And at 25 years old, he has a long career ahead of him. I'm very excited to see what this guy continues to bring to the table. In his past two fights, beating both Anthony Pettis and Jose Aldo by TKO, I thought he looked even better than he did in his previous fight versus Ricardo Lamas, finishing guys like Anthony Pettis, finishing guys like Jose Aldo. Pretty remarkable. His last loss obviously came at the hands of Conor McGregor in a unanimous decision loss in August of 2013. So that was a long time ago. So for people to talk about that and hold weight with that, I mean, it's obviously something that happened, but it was a long time ago. I think Max Halloway is a much different fighter than he once was, and as I think obviously Conor McGregor is a much different fighter than what he once was. So what's next for Halloway? Obviously, there's two options available. Cub Swanson is one of those options. Frankie Edgar is one of those options. So only time will tell. But if I were a betting man, I would assume that it would be Frankie Edgar's title shot. He's coming off a much more impressive victory over a much higher caliber of fighter in comparison to Cub Swanson. And Max Halloway already beat Cub Swanson. As Frankie Edgar already beat Cub Swanson. So I know Cub is on a great winning streak. He's coming off two impressive performances, especially versus Doohoo Choi and Artem Lobov. But Frankie Edgar is coming off a key win versus Yair Rodriguez, a fight that most fans, hardcore or casual, thought that this could quite possibly be a setup for Frankie Edgar, in which it would elevate Yair Rodriguez into superstardom with a win over Frankie Edgar, that is. And Frankie Edgar just shut down any reasoning for that. So I'm excited to see what the UFC decides to do with Max Holloway. More importantly, up next, really, what is next for Jose Aldo? 2 losses in his last 3 fights. Obviously, 1 loss to Conor McGregor, one win versus Frankie Edgar, and then this loss versus Max Holloway. What is next? Aldo is only 30 years old, but he has had a long, long career in the sport of MMA. So who knows what is next? Maybe they could do a Cub Swanson Jose Aldo fight. Maybe they could do Jose Aldo versus Yair Rodriguez. I really don't know. I don't know what's next for the guy, because he's still only 30 years old, but he doesn't deserve to get a title rematch. He had the interim title fight created for him because of the fact that Conor was not defending that belt. Could it be the dawn of a new era at featherweight? Most likely it is. And maybe Jose Aldo can finally just decide to move up to the UFC lightweight division, something that he has teased for quite some time. So it's crazy that he's had 2 losses in his last 3 fights, and he's only lost 3 fights in his entire career. His first loss was to Luciano Esvito back in Jungle Fight 5 in November of 2005. So this is a guy that was undefeated for 10 years, that lost to Conor, beat Frankie, and he lost to Max Holloway. And as I said, this was a fight in which Jose was winning up until that 3rd round. I think Max Holloway kind of bit down on the mouthpiece, so to speak, and just let Jose have it. So I think Holloway should definitely fight Frankie Edgar. This talk of a fight between Holloway and Conor McGregor, I don't see that happening. I don't see Conor fighting at featherweight ever again. And realistically, Conor might never fight in the UFC again if and when this fight happens with Floyd Mayweather. I don't see him continuing his fighting career whatsoever, and the UFC will have to vacate that UFC lightweight title as well, putting that division on hiatus as they are right now. There was supposed to be the interim lightweight title fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, but Khabib missed weight and had to pull out. Khabib was basically about to miss weight and had to pull out due to his weight cut or lack of preparation within his weight cut. So, I think Holloway has to forge his own path. He said it very much himself that he is the 2017 UFC featherweight champion and Conor McGregor is the 2015 featherweight champion. So I think Holloway could get through Frankie Edgar. If he can get through Frankie Edgar, then maybe Cub Swanson, then maybe, depending on what happens with Yair Rodriguez, they'll put him in there with Yair. I would assume that would be the case for sure. And that is that. Also on the card, you had Vitor Belfort getting a win versus Nate Marquardt. Vitor stating that he wants to fight as many times as he wants. He's not ready to call it a career at the age of 40. I thought Marquardt won the fight. I thought 2 rounds were to Marquardt and 1 round was to Vitor. But I did assume that Vitor would get that decision win in Brazil, being that the card was in Brazil, and he did. So, kudos to kudos to Vitor. It was a close fight, and I think that the case could be made easily for Vitor's Legends League. I mean, I would watch it, but I don't know how much longer Vitor will be a part of the UFC banner. That was his last fight on his UFC. Actually, he's got one more fight on his UFC contract. So one more fight on his UFC contract, and then maybe that's it for him in the UFC. Maybe it'll be on to Bellator for Vitor Belfort. Who knows? But Claudia Gadelha getting a very dominant performance in versus Carolina Kowalkiewicz. I really enjoyed watching her compete. Both of those ladies are tough as nails, and really they've added respectability to that UFC strawweight division. Claudia winning in the first round by rear naked choke, I did not expect that. A tough loss on the card for one fighter as well. Marlon Moraes, a split decision loss versus Rafael Assunção. Assunção is a tough, durable guy that TJ Dillashaw got through, but it was not easy. So Assunção keeps himself in the top 5 of the UFC bantamweight division, where the former World Series of Fighting champion Marlon Moraes decides that he is just not at that caliber. He didn't decide, obviously the fight dictated that. So that is that for UFC 212. What's next for Jose Aldo? I think he should move up to lightweight. Try and get some wins in that weight class. Validate himself as a UFC lightweight. I think the featherweight division for him is done. It's moved on, and he needs to, if he wants to continue to chase that Conor rematch, which I highly doubt he will get. But as I said, if he wants to continue to chase that Conor McGregor rematch, he needs to move up to lightweight and make things happen there. So that was my take on the Thomas Take Sports podcast of UFC 212. Max Holloway, now the UFC featherweight champion. We got a new champ, and I'm very excited to see what the Halloway era brings in the UFC featherweight division. Stay tuned as we go to commercial break for part 2 of the Thomas Take Sports podcast.